Alright, I'm back with another video, and I'm going to be going over a player that has not necessarily received enough attention from the media, but he's doing something pretty remarkable. So this is Yagiz Erdogmus. I'm sure I'm butchering that pronunciation since my Turkish is not so great, but this player is doing something pretty remarkable. So currently, he is 12 years old. He is the only player in the top 100 rated FIDE juniors that is born in 2011. So he's the youngest player in the U.S. juniors top 100. And he currently has a standard rating of 25-24, which is qualifying for a Grandmaster title. He's got the International Master title, which means he just needs the norms now. But I would imagine that very soon he's going to obtain that. If you take a look at this rating progress chart, it appears that he started playing around 2017 in December. He was roughly 1150 or just below 1200. And then he slowly worked his way up to just under 2000 in around March of 2020. And then he didn't play until about September of 2021. So he was about 1950 or so around this time, and then he just took off. Between 2021 in September and 2022 in September, he gained roughly 500 rating points, which is a monster gain for a one-year span, especially when you're climbing through the master rankings. I mean, that is incredibly difficult to do, but since he's so young and since he has less games played than a lot of people, I mean, he has just the potential to just get so much better and better, and he's beaten so many strong players. And I'm going to end up showing a game after this where he's beating a strong grandmaster that's over 2600. But really, I mean, he just took off. And in the last year or so, he's slowly worked his way up over 2500, but he hasn't been playing a ton of events. You can see there's been a little bit of a plateau over on this side after September of 2022, but still just unbelievable progress. If you take a look at his top lists records, you can see that he has been in the top 100 FIDE juniors since August of 2022. And then in March of 2023, he was 93rd with a rating of 2445. And then since then, in January 2024, live rating, he's ranked 33rd with a new rating of 25-24. So he's gained just under 100 rating points in a year, but more importantly, he crossed that 2500 threshold needed for the Grandmaster title, and that means he just needs the norms for the Grandmaster title. I'm not sure how many norms he has, but definitely very possible that he could obtain the Grandmaster title in the next few months if he has some good tournaments. And that's the main concern, I would say, is that like you see in November and December of 2023, he played 0 games. But it just seems like when he plays games, he generally scores pretty well and gains rating. And he's so young that he has just unbelievable potential at the moment, and he's playing very strong at the moment. So if you take a look at the top 100 list, I mean, he's ranked 33 with this 25-24 rating. He's the only player born in 2011 in the entire top 100 list. And that's significant because he has the potential to obtain the Grandmaster title before he turns 13, which is extremely rare company. There are only 5 guys that have done it. I believe it is Abhimanyu Mishra, Karyakin, Gukesh, I believe Sindarov has done it, and Prague also. So if you take a look at some of the players on this list, if you scroll up, I mean, you see all the big names. You see Noterbeck, you see Prague, you see Keimer, you see Gukesh, you see Nihal, you see Sindarov. I mean, you see all of these guys. Mishra's 10th at the moment. But, I mean, this guy is just absolutely knocking on the door, especially since he's so young. The growth potential is just unbelievable. And he has the potential to enter rare company if he obtains the Grandmaster title before June. I think that's when he turns 13. But just something really incredible to keep an eye on, and hopefully he's able to make that push and get the Grandmaster title in the next few months or so. Not sure how many norms he has, but definitely something to keep an eye on. All right, so taking a look at one of his best wins. So this is from the Baku Open. Our 12-year-old superstar has a rating of 24.54 in this game, and he's facing Serbian Grandmaster Alexandr Predke, 26.85 FIDE, which is a very high rating, just a hair under 2,700. And he's got the black pieces in this game. So let's just take a look at it and see what we're working with. So knight f3, d5, g3, knight f6, bishop g2, e6, all standard stuff so far. Black is adopting a pretty solid setup. Castle kingside, bishop e7, standard stuff. c4, striking at d5. So castle, d4, and then we get this Catalan type setup in this game. Black opts for c6, just having a super solid structure. All pretty standard so far. Knight c3 and a5. So a5 is good. Grab space on the queen side. Maybe look to play a4 at the right time. Pretty flexible move, not committing any of the other pieces yet. Okay, so knight to e5 is played. Just centralizing the knight. Maybe looking to play e4 with the bishop unleashed now. Knight f to d7 is played. This is a good move. Looking to trade off the knights, but also looking to maybe play f6 or bishop f6, something along those lines. F6 could be reasonable because then you look to play e5 long term. There's some interesting ideas here. Knight f d7 seems like a pretty logical move. Bishop to e3. This is the first move that I saw that kind of caught my attention. This seems like a bit of a strange move. I think something like e4 might make more sense. Maybe trade knights, play e4. But the engine actually seems to prefer bishop e3, so this must be some sort of theory. So I'm just going to rock with it. I'm curious what the idea is exactly, other than to just hyper protect d4. It doesn't make a ton of sense to block the e-pawn, but if the engine prefers this move, it seems like it must be a computer move, so it's got to be some sort of theory. And if I take a look at the database, after bishop to e3, it seems like there have been a few games. There was one other game that played this line, so it has been seen before. But I believe this game was the first game, so that's an interesting opening preparation by white with bishop e3. Okay, so knight takes e5, d takes e5, and then take the pawn on c4. Free pawn, black just takes it. Let's see what white has in mind here. Queen c2, just looking to develop the queen and bring a rook to the center, pretty logical. Knight to d7, looking to potentially pick up this pawn. Queen to e4. So this is a bit of a surprising move. I would have thought that something like f4 to defend e5, or something like maybe bring a rook to the center and pin this knight. Something like that could have made more sense because you can always defend this pawn with f4 later. But instead, white plays queen to e4 and chooses to defend the pawn with the queen, which is a little bit unusual, but it does make some sense because then you look to pick up this pawn on c4 with the queen potentially, but in doing that, you would undefend e5, but maybe long term, after you play f4, that could be a possibility. And black plays a4. So this is kind of a move I mentioned earlier, so just gaining space on the queen side. And also a hidden idea that this move has that I didn't really even think about until I saw it in the game is that it does prepare a rook lift at the right moment. So that could be a potential idea at some point to play rook to a5 and then try and swing the rook over laterally. It's a strong move. White plays a3, stopping white from potentially playing a3 himself, or stopping black from playing a3 himself. So queen to a5 is played, just developing the queen, looking to win this pawn on e5 potentially. f4 is played to defend the pawn. Bishop to c5 is played, looking to trade these dark square bishops. And if you trade on c5, you could potentially invite the knight in, which would be pretty good. queen takes c5 is instead played. I was kind of torn whether or not knight takes or queen takes is better. Queen takes makes some sense because you deliver a check. Knight takes also seems really tempting because you get knight b3 ideas. You hit the queen. You do lose c4 though, so queen takes c5 seems logical. So king h1, f6 is played, and then queen to c2. So after f6, this is a little bit of a weakening move. I would have looked to immediately try and take advantage of this. I'm not exactly sure the best way to do so. e6 seems a little bit weak, but if you play e takes f6, it just seems like knight takes f6, and then the bishop defends the pawn, and it seems like black is doing pretty well there. So it's not so easy. Maybe just bring a rook to the center, something like rook a d1 would make some sense. But white plays queen to c2, which seems a little unusual. It seems like white is realizing he might have gone astray by playing queen e4 and then not being able to win this pawn back on c4. Now he's simply retreating. So black plays f takes e5, and white tries knight e4. So this is the big idea with queen c2. You vacate the e4 square to play knight e4 and gain tempo on the queen and activate your pieces. So queen to e7 is played, and knight to g5. So this is a aggressive play by white. So gaining a tempo on the queen with knight e4, and then playing knight g5 and threatening checkmate in one, which black has to defend. Black chooses to play g6 to block that diagonal, and then queen takes c4 is played. So white did end up getting this pawn back, but black won this e5 pawn and ends up capturing on f4. So material is still balanced after g takes f4, and there's some interesting things to consider in this game. Both kings are relatively unsafe. I would say that white's king is safer here, but the one glaring thing I see is that this bishop on c8 is really buried. I mean, he really cannot get out anyway. So it's really an interesting position here because black does have some play though. So like this rook is pretty good on this file, and as I mentioned earlier, this rook lift can become very useful at the right time. So pretty interesting position we've got here. I also mentioned that material is equal. Black is actually up a pawn here, so that is important to consider. White definitely has the more active pieces and the safer king, but black is up a pawn. So knight b6 is played, gain tempo on the queen, queen d4, and knight to d5, centralizing the knight. Good move. White plays queen to d2. I'm not really sure what the big idea of this move is. It's the engine's best move, so it makes some sense, but I'm not really sure the main idea of that. Black plays knight to f6 here. Still trying to think about queen d2. I don't really see a major threat or anything. Maybe it's just a waiting move, just a coordinating move. Knight f6 is played, and then queen to c3 is played. So a little bit of shuffling here at the moment, knight to d5, and then white plays queen to g3. So moving the queen could potentially be useful opposite this king, especially since white could potentially bring a rook to the g-file at some point and use the g-file, the semi-open g-file, could be useful. And black plays rook to a5, the aforementioned rook lift that was set up by playing a5, a4. And white plays e4, looking to kick the knight on d5, and black plays knight to f6, e5, kicking the knight again, and simultaneously cutting this rook off a little bit from coming all the way over to the king side. Black plays knight h5, queen g4, rook to b5, looking to target this pawn potentially. Bishop to e4 is played, just centralizing the pieces, maybe looking to clear the g-file and put a battery down here, and also just putting the bishop on a good diagonal, maybe looking to crash through here at some point. King to h8 is played. Rook to f2, maybe looking to double. but also defending this pawn on b2. And this is when the game starts to get really interesting. Rook takes e5. So taking advantage of this pin right here. So if f takes e5 is played, the rook on f2 hangs. And that's what we have in the game. We have this, and then white uncorks knight takes h7, which is a inaccuracy in this case. And according to the engine, better was actually to leave this rook on e5 and go for this idea right away. And the engine's reading zeros, but I think there is some merit to leaving this rook under attack, but I'm sure the line gets relatively complicated after knight takes h7. If queen takes h7 is played, then you go in and play bishop takes g6, and similar to the game. If knight takes h7 and rook takes e4, then knight takes f8, queen takes f8, and queen takes g6 with the fork is probably pretty good for white, considering black has a completely naked king over here and a fully open g-file. Knight to f6 could be played, but then something along the lines of either bringing a rook to the d file or the g file, something like rook d2 or rook g1. Black's king is just too unsafe here. Generally speaking, the two minor pieces are going to be better than the rook, but in this case, black's bishop is terrible and his king is extremely unsafe. So this probably would be highly unclear and a bit suspect for black if he were to go in for that rook takes e4. So in the game, we have f takes e5, and then rook takes f2, and then knight takes h7. So what's the difference? Queen takes h7, bishop takes g6, and this is when I learned that this 12-year-old does not mess around, because he just plays an absolutely baller move here. Knight to f6. An absolutely baller move, just a savage move. Knight to f6. So you're unleashing the queen this way. So you're threatening checkmate in one, ignoring the attack on your queen, putting your knight on a square where it can be captured, but you're threatening mate in ones. So the immediate thing that you have to do is you got to deal with mate in one, or you got to do something about this queen. So you could either take the queen and allow knight takes g4, or you can move your queen to defend h2. So white chooses to play queen to g1, queen to h4, moving the queen away from attack. E takes f6, giving up that knight. Queen takes f6. And then if we take stock of material, after all is said and done, black is up a pawn. And in this case, it's not exactly so clear, because black's king is unsafe, but it's not as big of an issue in this position because a pair of rooks have been traded off. So if black is able to free this bishop quickly, black should just be able to convert this extra pawn advantage. And black has good piece coordination with the queen and the rook. Queenside majority over here. It's looking promising for black at this point in the game. So bishop to e4, e5 is played, looking to unleash the bishop this way, and then queen to g3 is played. The engine considers this an inaccuracy, but it's a little bit tough to suggest what to do for white. This makes some sense. Bring the queen back into the game, maybe look to give checks, bring a rook to the g-file, something along those lines. However, queen to f4, offering the immediate queen exchange, is pretty difficult to avoid. You can't give a check on h3 due to this bishop. There's not really a whole lot else you can do, so queen takes f4 happens. The queen trade is on board. And this is just a position where black is dominating. Black is up a pawn here. Same color bishops generally going to favor the pawn advantage, versus opposite color bishops can tend to be a little bit more josh. But here black is just in the driver's seat. So king to g1 is played, looking to hit the rook. Rook to e2, hitting the bishop. Rook d1, counter threat with rook to d8 check, picking up this bishop. Bishop to g4 is played. Rook to d4 is played to defend this bishop. And then f3. So just marching this past f-pawn, and black is in serious control here. h3 is played, looking to trying to deflect the bishop from defense of this f3 pawn. But instead, black simply just keeps marching forward. f2 check, king f1, bishop takes h3 check. If you take the rook, you queen. So bishop g2 has to be played. Bishop takes g2, king takes g2, b5, an important move to defend this a4 pawn. And then essentially this b4 pawn is lost. If rook b4 is played, you can pretty much do anything here. White is completely tied down. You can just bring your king into the game, and this is going to be a very easy conversion. Instead, white tries rook to d6 to try and take this c6 pawn, but after rook takes b2, rook takes c6, b4, looking to create an outside pass pawn, which is what happens in the game. After a3, white simply throws in the towel. There's no way to stop both of these pawns. A sample line could be like this: rook to a6, a2, and then there's a main threat here. Let's just say you play b5 here. Looks like rook to b1 should just be winning, because you'd be threatening to promote the a pawn and the f pawn at the same time, and there's no way to defend against that. So that would be a win. But after pawn to a3, white simply throws in the towel. And this was a pretty impressive game. Good conversion on black's part. Really solid play, and really showed no fear when his king was in a little bit of danger, and really just took down a 2685 GM in classy fashion. So this is definitely a player to keep an eye out for, and hopefully he gets his GM title coming up, and I'm looking forward to the future of him.